Checking up on the latest in Providence with the lead reporter in that city tonight.
The Dan Yorke State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
So in the last few weeks, we've had each of the candidates for mayor of Providence, although out there lurking, there may be one more. We'll see if we get some intel from Dan McGowan on that. Of course, for WPRI.com and Eyewitness News, Dan does a lot more than just the city of Providence, but he's certainly the guy and the go-to guy in the city. And there's a bunch of issues going on right now, including but not limited to the mayor's travel habits and the pending controversy to bubble up here over whether to sell the water supply. And I think that's a whole lot more complicated than the mayor is actually making it out to be. It's great to have you in. Thanks very much for tuning in on this beautiful spring Wednesday evening. The president stepped up yesterday and, made a very, very controversial decision. He certainly forecasted this during the campaign, and then he pulled the trigger on the Iran deal.
Hours after President Trump walked away from the Iran nuclear deal, that country's news agency called him the troublemaker. And Iranian President Hassan Rouhani warned that his country could restart its nuclear activities within weeks. At Parliament, lawmakers set a paper American flag ablaze and chanted "Death to America." Mr. Trump declared he had definitive proof that Iran violated the 2015 agreement aimed at freezing the country's nuclear ambitions, but he produced no evidence. The U.S. will now reimpose crippling sanctions against the country. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle voiced concern.
I think by getting out of the Iran deal, that simply moves us backwards, not forwards.
I'm obviously hoping the president decides a way to stay in it.
The leaders of the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, who urged the U.S. to stay in the deal, issued a joint statement that expressed regret and concern about the decision. The pullout was also condemned by former President Barack Obama, who tweeted that it was a serious mistake. President Trump has signaled he is open to renegotiations, but Iran may be unwilling to come to the table.
He's open to negotiations, but he just broke the deal, so he thinks he's going to choke him. And I'm not so sure that's the case. Since 2014, the Iranian economy has improved significantly, according to many, many experts, including a Brandeis economics professor who was born in Iran, who I spoke with on the radio yesterday.
The conditions in 2014, 2013, and 2015 were so severe that when the sanctions were lifted finally after the JCPOA agreement, the situation relatively improved. At least Iran's oil exports increased. Iran was able to import necessities and we observed some revitalization of the economy.
Yeah, so they're doing better over there. And I think there's a 3 to 6 to 9 month window here where things will be somewhat stable. I'm pretty sure that Iran will stay in the deal with the Europeans, although it will erode, and at some point they'll veer off. The Europeans will look to us. Listen, the reason why Macron and Merkel were here over the last couple of weeks was to try to convince the president not to do this. Now they've got to kind of hold up their end of the bargain, hoping that they aren't going to develop any kind of nuclear technology. But without the weight of our role in this agreement, why would they bother, right? There are some who just say that anything that Obama did, he wants to undo. I think there's a flavor of that. This is a crapshoot. Of course, Israel thinks it's the greatest thing in the world. Netanyahu has been pretty hard line. But those ballistic missiles and terrorism are certainly something that have to be addressed. I understand what the president is saying there. Could they have stepped up an effort to step on their neck that way and keep the nuclear deal in place? I think they could have and should have and should still. All right, next issue. In the midst of this, we got a wacky oligarch story here. The headline is this in the Wall Street Journal, and here's a short story on it.
I mean, this is a big deal. I mean, he had to have been receiving this money for something.
In a 7-page document, attorney Michael Avenatti claims that from October 2016 to January of this year, Michael Cohen's firm, Essential Consultants LLC, engaged in suspicious financial transactions totaling nearly $4.5 million. Those transactions, he says, included roughly $500,000 from Russian oligarch Viktor Vekselberg through the U.S. company Columbus Nova. Cohen created Essential Consultants in October of 2016 and used it to wire $130,000 in hush money to Stormy Daniels to keep quiet about her alleged affair with Donald Trump. Avenatti claims the funds from the Russian oligarch, quote, may have replenished the account following the payment to Miss Clifford. Vekselberg was one of several Russian oligarchs sanctioned last month for his close ties to Vladimir Putin. In a statement, his spokesman said Vekselberg has never had any contractual relationship with Mr. Cohen or Essential Consultants.
All right, listen, Mr. Avenatti is not a prosecutor. And he's got his own agenda here, no doubt. But did you think that the Stormy Daniels story would actually intersect with the Russian investigative thing? I didn't. Now it seemingly has, and all bets are off. So that was kind of hidden in some ways with the Iran story yesterday. And then this morning, the president announces that the 3 U.S. citizens in North Korea are coming home, and he's going to meet them along with Secretary of State, newly appointed Mike Pompeo, at 2 a.m. at Andrews, which is good news. And so we bop back and forth with this international scene, and at home, it's a complete mess. All right, the Elorza travel time story. Is it worth it? I mean, listen, Target 12 picks its battles, and generally they are profound ones. Headline here, Mayor Elorza likes to go a lot of places. Here's some evidence.
The mayor is actually out of town right now. He had a conference down in Austin, Texas.
Eventually I was here. You were not here. You got here that night.
I got here at 4:30. That's not nighttime.
There was a press
conference. I got here in the middle of the storm.
Reminds me of Chafee a little bit there, you know, in the dialogue with Tim, and it's that extra. It's that extra after the punctuation, you know, the middle of the storm.
There's a little bit of like the sort of trying to get a word in edgewise there. Yes. I was in the room for that interview, and there were a handful of those interactions there, and we saw most of them in Tim's story on television.
So this is the 3 of the 4 or 5 investigative musketeers in the Eyewitness News newsroom. Reportedly were chatting one day. Ted Nesi mentioned to Tim that he thought that the mayor had been out a lot.
Yeah.
Of course, that's your beat, and you dug in, and Tim dug in and found out that he is out a lot.
Yeah, you know, this is something that we did a story originally a couple of years ago, me and Walt Buteau, so added another person to the investigative team, that we just did a story looking at his first year in office. You know, I had noticed he had been out of town a handful of times, and we just looked at it, and you know, he kind of gave him the chance to say, here's what I was doing. I think that it was a generally, I don't know if it was a positive piece, but it was generally, got to say, we're trying to recruit businesses, all that kind of stuff. And you know, last couple of years, and especially at the beginning of this year when you saw the mayor out of town for kind of significant events, significant one-time events, the shooting at the mall, there was the weather thing, there was a press conference that the police had that he was, so much so that he was at the next day that they had a press conference, he was there for that. So Ted, exactly right, said, you know, it just feels like it. And we said, let's do a public records request. Let's see what he's been doing. And sure enough, he's traveled 59 out-of-state trips. I think 35, 40 of them, we said required a boarding pass. So, you know, you're getting on a plane. It wasn't just like going to Seekonk. As I've been saying to people, people say, oh, you know, well, Rhode Island's small. Well, we wouldn't have done the story if he was going to Target, right? That's not the point of the story. So.
I don't know. Too many trips to Seekonk can get you in trouble, too.
I feel that way myself here.
Anyway, all right, when we come back, we'll talk about whether this is going to have a serious impact on the race or not. But in the meantime, let me remind you that Navigate Credit Union, they've got the Card Valet app, which you simply download on your phone, and it will provide for you more banking options than you could imagine, literally right on your phone. AdvocateCU.org is the website. 18 locations now across the state. Navigate Credit Union. Enjoy life's journey. Right back with Dan. Stay with us.
It's a little bit excessive, but taking those trips, if they're going to benefit the people of Providence, I'm okay with that. But I just like to see what benefits. I'd like to, use some of the technology he's talking about in innovation and show us when you're in China. Show us what you're doing in Guatemala, that you're not at, Auntie, his Tia's house or something. I want to see that he's doing something for the city of Providence.
Some reciprocal relationship with Guatemala City for products.
Yeah, that's a little questionable. Like I said, I'm not accusing him of anything. I'd love him to just show us that. And with all this, we're supposed to be this innovative, city. Let's see some of that.
That's Kobe Dennis, mayoral candidate, reflecting on Mayor Elorza's travel stuff. If that's the heaviest, dutiest criticism you're going to get from a political opponent, I think this travel story is interesting and won't bother him a bit.
Agree, 100%. I completely agree with you.
Bob DeRobio reportedly, we tape early in the afternoon. No, we're not live. Don't tell anybody. Reportedly, as we speak, or earlier today on WPRO, complaining about it.
Yeah.
But it's kind of
my gut in this is that it's not a major. No, we didn't. Obviously, we don't go into doing stories to think, oh, this is going to affect someone politically or whatever. But the reaction to it.
Is it newsworthy? Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, and I think
absolutely.
Yeah.
But is it going to hurt him?
No, I don't think so. I think the mayor is incredibly. It's not popular, but popular within his base of people. And when you're the incumbent mayor of Providence, it's really, really hard to get taken out by two candidates right now that are not don't have any money, don't have any organization. That's how you win these things, and it's very difficult to do without that stuff.
Jess, we have a headline here from Dan's recent story on Mayor Elorza and some of the campaign promises that he made. You suggest that while he certainly didn't load it up, he's accomplished or checked off the boxes mostly on the things he promised to do.
Yeah, it's funny. I covered that whole campaign, and remember, there was 8-9 months pre-Buddy, right? Everything after Buddy was silly season. You and I talked a bunch, and everyone talked about it forever. But pre-Buddy, there was a good 8-9 month run of campaign promises, of back and forth between Mike Solomon, the city council president at the time, Brett Smiley, and of course Jorge Elorza. And so, you know what? I'll tell you, it was a reader gave me the idea. It said, hey, you should look at some of the things that he promised. And so I did. What I did was go right to his campaign website, which he hadn't updated, and said, looked at every single one and then just gave an update. And sometimes I had questions, so I asked the mayor's office, hey, what's the status on this? But generally speaking, I think he's done what he said he was going to do. Now, that doesn't mean he has accomplished so much. It is, like you said, it's that many of the things, more bike lanes. Check off the box. There are more bike lanes in the city of Providence. Now, is that a huge change? Is that an economic development driver? Probably not.
Where are most of the bike lanes now?
You're seeing it a little bit more downtown. You're seeing it going towards Broad Street. So what they want to be able to do, the ideal, according to the mayor, the ideal sort of thing that could happen would be you could go from India Point Park all the way to Roger Williams Park in a fairly straight or easy, I hate to say bike path, but easy way to get through the city where you're not going to get held up in traffic or hit by a car or anything like that. And they're moving in that direction. That's something they have, to their credit, accomplished. There are big things they haven't, I should say.
Awesome. No, quality of life, sure.
Right.
City sustenance.
Yeah, and that was my big caveat in this was
he ran as not Buddy.
That's right.
I'm not Buddy.
Right. Yeah.
God rest him. So that really it was a choice between old guard, new guard, and there was not a lot of specificity.
It was not about policy. This was not a policy race, and it wasn't. It's not like Buddy made it a policy race. He tried a little bit to bring policy into it. It was a, do you like the past? Do you remember me? Do you remember all that
Buddy
I
was
did versus
he was talking about building up the riverfront a little bit.
Yeah.
Had some nice drawings,
sure,
that kind of thing. But for the most part,
right. And I remember, and you were there at these things too. I used to have this conversation with Buddy a lot when he was running. How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to do it? Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Well, that's something I worry about.
Well, it kind of let Elorza off the hook.
Absolutely.
So he ran a cultural mayor race, and now you've got two candidates that you know, are nice guys.
Absolutely.
I mean, I'd spend all day with Kobe Dennis. He's done great work in the community. DeRobio, I only know from the visit he made here, but he's got a little bit of an education, you know, a lot of an education background, but really doesn't tell us anything compelling about what he'd do there.
No, it's a very, I mean, look, when you get into it, this using that 2014 mayor's race, again, pre-Buddy, you have 9 months of campaigning. I met with Jorge Elorza when he was thinking about running back in 2012. I wasn't even working at Channel 12 yet. I remember we sat down, had a coffee, he told me he's going to run for mayor. For the next year, he had to catch up, learn the city, understand the budget, things like that. When you're getting into it, kind of where they are now, and Kobe Dennis, I know he announced last year, but has not exactly shown that he understands how the city functions, how the budget works, all that kind of stuff. We haven't seen it yet. We haven't seen a lot of policy proposals. So it's really hard to gain any sort of you know, attraction to if you don't have
Kobe
any of that.
said here yesterday, was it yesterday? Yes, he was here yesterday.
Yeah, he was, yeah.
And telling me he's going to develop, you know, a young person constituency. And that's when I say, okay, this race is over. John Lombardi, former acting mayor, state representative, on and off for a long time, council president, staple of the environment on Federal Hill.
Absolutely, yeah.
Good guy, you know, old-time good guy in Providence. Is he in?
Seems to want to be. I think what
he could rattle Elorza's cage.
I think he could absolutely rattle it. One of the things, I was a very young reporter back in 2010 when he ran, and one of the things, if you talk to Angel Taveras, if you talk to Stephen Costantino, the other two Democrats in that primary back in 2010, they'll tell you John worked his butt off, and John will work hard if he runs. I think his question is, can he raise any money? And he's going to spend the next 5-6 weeks. He's already polled, but he needs to spend the next 5 weeks.
What's his polling data say?
He says it shows him in a good light, but he hasn't released it all the way publicly. I think he's more focused on what Mayor Elorza seemingly does not look to be an overwhelming favorite anywhere. I think if John Lombardi got him in a heads-up race, you would have a credible candidate.
But still, a little bit of new guard, old guard.
Absolutely. You could run this almost the same playbook. Unfortunately, because John Lombardi and Buddy Cianci, other than having...
But I don't think Lombardi throws up in the east side like Buddy did.
Although I seem to recall, again, being a little bit of a young reporter at the time, I remember John Lombardi sort of venting to me, saying that he had a really tough time making inroads on the east side back then. Now, one difference, Angel Taveras was rock solid on the east side. He had Worth Yorke, all the insiders that were with him back in 2010. It's not exactly the same now, although certainly the mayor that's where his base is.
All right, when we come back, there's a crucial issue though, you know, finances and that kind of thing that we need to talk about. Stay with us.
The objective is to be mayor of Providence. The objective is to bring a better education system to the students in Providence, to make a better community.
That's why we hire superintendents.
They need sometimes a little bit of guidance and a little bit of the support from the office.
Robert DeRobio, former longtime administrator in the city of Providence school system. He's in his early 70s. He's retired. Seems like a very decent guy.
Absolutely.
And probably pretty smart on education issues. Not a lot of energy.
Right.
You sat in that chair and was waiting for him to tick it up a little bit.
Right.
There's not much going on there. You know, he would suggest, and Kobe Dennis would suggest, that Mayor Elorza has dropped the ball in not having ongoing negotiations with the school.
Right.
With the teachers, the teacher union.
Yeah.
What's the latest on that?
You know, it's still something that they're nowhere near an agreement.
Are they getting together at all?
I believe there was a attempt to reach out this week. I believe that's the case. I'm not 100%.
I'm trying to figure what the politics of that kind of tentativeness is. You know, teacher unions are not that popular. Teachers are popular.
Right.
So there's something that gets lost in the translation for teachers and teacher unions. The political damage that they hope is done by saying the mayor won't meet with us, the mayor won't meet with us, just doesn't stick.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think, look, the mayor and the teachers union, I think there's lots of things you could criticize. They should certainly be talking, obviously, all those things. But if the teachers union has not done a particularly good job of talking about anything other than they want a raise. The mayor says, look, I gave you a raise. Your contract ended. You got a raise right before the contract ended. And when it becomes a fight over money versus performance, and the mayor, points out, look, schools aren't performing that well, it's not one that particularly works, I think, in the public.
What will work? The pension deficit is near $1 billion now in the city of Providence. I mean, that's a looming atom bomb. Yeah. And the Water Supply Board sale would bring in maybe $400 million. And I'm not so sure. Steve Laffey wrote an interesting op-ed piece in the Journal today, and it's always kind of caught my eye and ear that, that's right, Steve Laffey, former Cranston mayor, now resides in Colorado. He's saying you can't sell this thing. Right. One lawsuit or one intervener between the City of Providence Water Supply Board and the Narragansett Bay Commission could probably suspend that whole project.
Absolutely. If they go forward with some sort of sale or long-term lease agreement, maybe it ends up happening, but it will end up settled in court. There is no question about it, because there's enough question. I sat in court a couple of years ago for when the Providence pension there was a opt-out case where a bunch of people when there was that pension settlement under Taveras, Mayor Taveras literally, he was out of office, he literally testified that they looked at selling the water supply and he felt like, his lawyers felt like it was owned by the ratepayers, and there's an argument that can be made, but
the ratepayers are 60% of the ratepayers are outside the city of Providence.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So it's a tough sell. Now, what I've been told by folks that work for the city, lawyers, things like that, they say it becomes a little bit easier with a long-term lease type agreement. That clears up some of the who owns it sort of stuff. That's what they seem to think. I do think the legislature giving them some rights could potentially make this happen. But I'm not totally sold that it will happen. I will say, to the credit of this administration, the Elorza administration, they are putting something on the table. And it's something that the General Assembly, I think, should look at. They should maybe create a commission. I hate to say that because I laugh at these things, but do something
Even
to
if
solve
they pull it off, they tackle 30 to 40% of the total pension deficit.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incredibly.
It's not in lieu of systemic change.
That's right. What you need to do,
or blowing it up.
What probably would need to happen, let's say short of blowing it up, which is totally something that could be on the table. That's right. I think, let's say the governor is reelected, which we don't know. You could see a scenario where the governor says you need to do a bunch of things, reforms, and maybe do the water supply, and maybe that's when you get this to happen.
I don't see it as a big political issue right now, but once the litigation starts flying and he has to answer for it, and maybe Lombardi's in the race, he's not coasting to re-election at this point.
Oh, no.
Answers on that systemic financial problem will have to be proven, have to be provided to the city.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
All right. If you want to know anything about the city, just keep following Dan on WPRI.com and Eyewitness News. Final word when we come back. Still juggling the schedule, but either tomorrow or Friday night, Giovanni Ferrosi, who has been, I don't know, volatile? Maybe that's not the right word. All over the map? Defensive in his bid for governor, about his Benrus challenges, will be here to talk about those things. Okay? Have a great night. We'll see you on the radio at 3 on WPRO tomorrow. Bye.